spot on in the middle there. So it is very possible that that trough is being formed or is about to be formed. Okay, it could be formed sometime within the next week. After which, of course, the 40-day cycle is expected to cause prices to rise. However, before taking a trade in the 40-day cycle, it's very important you consider the longer cycles. The 80-day cycle is pushing prices downwards. Okay, the 20-week cycle I've just demonstrated has already formed a peak and is therefore already pushing prices downwards. The 40-week cycle has also formed a peak. You can study the analysis for yourself and work it out for yourself, but you will discover, I believe, that the 40-week cycle has formed a peak and is therefore pushing prices downwards. The 18-month cycle is probably still pushing prices upwards. The 54-month cycle, 4.5-year cycle, is pushing prices downwards. That's a lot of cycles pushing that price downwards. Are you really interested in buying on the basis that the measly little 40-day cycle, I shouldn't call it a measly little cycle, it's as strong as any other cycle, but the 40-day cycle is the only cycle that's currently causing prices to move upwards. Okay? So in terms of performing trading, and not working with the trader edition of Sentient Trader, purely with the analyst edition, you need to understand Hurst's cyclic principles. Okay, there are only 8 of them. You need to understand them thoroughly, and you need to understand how the cycles work together to cause prices to move in the financial markets. So, yes, as a colleague of mine said to me yesterday as he boldly entered a long trade in the S&P 500, yes, the 40-day cycle is about to form a trough. However, I certainly would not be about to enter a long trade on the basis of the 40-day cycle, okay? Because it looks to me like all the longer cycles have turned down. Okay, the short-term underlying trend, which is what Hurst said you should look at if you're an experienced trader, the short-term underlying trend is neutral, which means that we can expect a neutrally shaped cycle. I think it's probably going to be a bearishly shaped cycle, but there could be the opportunity for making a very quick and a profitable trade out of the 40-day cycle rising, although I certainly would not recommend it. If you were absolutely adamant that you wanted to trade this 40-day cycle, when would you enter the market? Because the market's busy falling now towards a trough, does not mean you must buy it this morning, okay? Because the markets are heading towards the trough and possibly formed a trough yesterday does not mean you must buy. How do you decide at what level to buy? You decide at what level to buy on the basis of the cyclic tools, the FLD and the VTL. I mentioned earlier that you must bear in mind the reasoning of your trade. The reasoning is that the 40-day cycle has formed a trough and is turning up. Those are very important words, has formed a trough. How do we know the 40-day cycle has formed a trough? We know the 40-day cycle has formed a trough when it crosses the 40-day FLD. Okay? There is the 40-day FLD. It's quite high. Okay? I'm sure you will agree. We also know that the 40-day cycle has formed a trough when the 20-day cycle VTL has crossed. And I didn't get that wrong. You do look at the shorter cycle VTL. Now, there isn't a shorter cycle available, so we cannot make trading decisions. However, this 40-day cycle trough that we are trading is synchronous. In other words, it's occurring at the same time as the 20-day cycle, the shorter cycle beneath it. So, you need to ask yourself, how many days have passed since the formation of the most recent 20-day cycle? And you can do that by simply popping up the bar count. Okay? 18 bars have occurred since the most recent formation of the 20-day cycle trough. Okay? And does that look like a reasonable positioning for the 20-day cycle trough? Yes, I think that looks very reasonable. It occurred on an exactly average nominal length 17 days. Okay, so that looks like a very reasonable, very accurate positioning of the 20-day cycle trough. Okay, so if we receive evidence that the 20-day cycle has formed another trough, does that mean that it is this trough that we are waiting for? Well, yes, it does. Of course it does. If we receive evidence that the 20-day cycle, which bounced like that, formed a trough there, bounced again and is now heading towards a trough, if we receive evidence that that cycle has formed a trough, then yes, that means that the 40-day cycle has also formed a trough. Okay? So how do we know when the 20-day cycle has formed a trough? We look at the 20-day FLD. There it is. It's a little bit lower. And we look at the 10-day VTL. Now there that is. It's not very low. Okay? The same reasoning can be extended to the next shorter cycle. What about the 10-day cycle trough? Well, let's have a look at the position of the most recent 10-day cycle trough in our analysis. Okay, I'm going to count the bars from there. 9 bars have elapsed since, according to this analysis, the most recent 10-day cycle trough occurred. Now, I'd like to point something out. That 10-day cycle trough has been phased in the middle of a weekend. How is that possible? Well, cycles don't stop moving because we're taking a weekend. It's a very important thing to remember. So, 10-day and 5-day and 40-day and 4.5-year cycle troughs could occur over a weekend, or on New Year's Day, or on Christmas Day, or over the Easter weekend. So it's not impossible that the 10-day cycle trough has occurred there. However, the fact that it's phased in the middle of the weekend means that I think one needs to take it with a pinch of salt. Let's measure that 10-day cycle trough. Okay, that is 9 days. Okay, so yes, it's very possible that during that weekend, although we weren't aware of it, the 10-day cycle did in fact form a trough. Okay, it's also possible that the 10-day cycle formed a trough over here, perhaps. That makes it a cycle of 14 days, so it's very unlikely. So yes, I'm going to go with that phasing of positioning that 10-day cycle trough in the middle of the weekend. As unlikely or as unusual as it sounds, you need to get used to the fact that troughs do occur over the weekend. So I'm going to go with that. Okay, 9 bars have passed since that 10-day cycle trough was formed. Okay, so if I receive evidence that the next 10-day cycle trough has occurred, then does that mean that the 40-day cycle trough has also occurred? Well, yes, it does, because that 10-day cycle trough is synchronous with the 40-day cycle trough that we are in the process of trading. So how do we get evidence that the 10-day cycle trough has occurred? Very simple. We look at the 10-day FLD and we look at the 5-day VTL. All right, so there is the 5-day VTL. Now, if price crosses above that 5-day FLD, and if I double-click there, if price crosses above that 5-day FLD, which today, the 11th of April 2012, is at the level of 1375. So in other words, if median price crosses above the level of 1375 today, then that is evidence that the 10-day cycle trough has occurred, and it will have occurred yesterday, of course. If median price crosses up above the 10-day FLD level, 1383, then that is also evidence that the 10-day cycle trough has occurred. And therefore, you could be entering the market at those levels to trade your 40-day cycle if, despite all warnings to the contrary, you were determined to do that. Now, why are there 2 different levels? Is this, what does this mean? Well, there are 2 different cyclical tools. The markets are not perfect. Okay? Sometimes cyclic levels are crossed, and it turns out to be a false cross. How do you avoid that? Well, by watch the trader chat from 2 weeks ago. Make sure that you are confident in your analysis. The better your analysis, the better your trading. It's as simple as that. Okay? So that is how you would make trading decisions on the basis of what's about to happen now. First of all, I would not be entering a long trade on the 40-day cycle. Often the very best trade to take is no trade at all. Would I consider trading short the current 40-day cycle, in other words, the next 40-day cycle? Yes, I would. The trade that I would be sitting and looking out for is not this long trade that is about to occur over here. The trade I would be looking out for is when that 40-day cycle turns down and goes short and starts crossing FLDs and VTLs and starts heading down towards the next 40-day cycle trough, which is, of course, expected around about the middle of May. So the trade that I would be thinking of taking at the moment would be a short trade based on the 40-day cycle. Certainly not a long trade. All right. How do you make those trading decisions? If you have the analyst edition of Sentient Trader, well, you use your FLDs and your VTLs, and you read those levels off the chart, and you make your trading decisions using Hurst cyclic principles and with all the information that's presented to you on your analyst edition chart. So that brings me to the end of today's Trader Chat. If you have any questions, I'd be delighted to try to answer them. I hope that you found it interesting. How would you make trading decisions today using only the analyst edition of Sentient Trader? You do it, of course, using Hurst cyclic principles and using the analysis that Sentient Trader has produced for you, and using all of the tools that Sentient Trader has in it, in terms of viewing the cyclic model, in terms of understanding the analysis, in terms of calculating your underlying trend, and working out what kind of a trade you really want to be taking. Okay, so if you really want to be going long the S&P 500 at the moment, that's between you and your bank balance. I wouldn't recommend it. I'm not feeling bullish, despite the fact that a 40-day cycle trough is approaching. Thank you very much, everybody, for your time. Thank you for joining me on today's Trader Chat. Thank you for your interest in Sentient Trader. And thank you, the Patient Trader and William, for your comments. I'm pleased that today's been the best presentation. Your bank balance, your bank balances are very important to all of us. Thank you, Blair and Tom. Very good to see you all there. And thank you very much for your interest in Sentient Trader. And so I look forward to seeing you again in 2 weeks' time. Bear in mind the announcement I made at the beginning of Trader Chat that we have started our breakaway chats, and tomorrow at 11 a.m. UTC, which stands for Universal Coordinates Time, although why they say UTC instead of UCT I've never quite understood. It's got to do with the French, I believe. But 11 a.m. UTC tomorrow is our Oz Trader Chat. It's aimed towards the Australian time zone, and we will be discussing the Australian market. But it's the same sort of trader chat stuff. The better you understand this, the more efficiently you can trade. So thank you very much.